what we've been seeing to our astonishment on the streets of London and elsewhere in these terrible pro-Hamas demonstrations ever since October 7, that you have a situation in which pro-Israel people who are standing peacefully with a placard saying Hamas is a terrorist entity, whatever, are basically hustled away, threatened with arrest, and treated as criminals. Whereas the people who are prancing around, shrieking death to Jews, genocide now, intifada now, globalize the intifada, destroy Israel, and so on, are shielded. And the perverse reasoning is this, that from the police point of view, their purpose is to prevent public disorder, public violence. The people who are going to be violent are the people who are the pro-Hamas people. The people who are never going to be violent are the pro-Israel people. The pro-Hamas people are going to become violent by being provoked by the people who are doing nothing wrong. So it's the people who do nothing wrong who have to be treated as criminals in order to stop the violence by the people who must therefore be effectively shielded. And it's a pretty well the same sort of thing, I think, with Israel. The thinking goes, if Israel wasn't there, there wouldn't be a problem. And I think that's really at the back and even the front of the minds of many in the West and Western leaders, that Israel's very presence is the provocation. And so it's incumbent upon Israel to do everything it can to stop these lunatics from going mad. The idea that the West should actually stop the lunatics themselves, not least because, especially in the case of Iran, the lunatics directly and specifically threaten the West as well, doesn't occur to them. Why? Well, because this is where the second part of this ridiculous thinking kicks in. The West is fundamentally in the grip of the liberal orthodoxy, which holds that every single conflict in the world is amenable to negotiation and compromise, because every single person in the world is basically like us in the West. They are governed by reason and, above all, self-interest. So it's obvious that if you have a conflict of whatever kind, it doesn't matter what the cause is. It doesn't matter who started it. It doesn't matter who is right and who is wrong. It doesn't matter who is the aggressor and who is the victim. Aggressor and victim are categories which, in this thinking, have no salience whatsoever. All that matters is to stop the violence. And so you have to put them in a room and crack their heads together until they reach an agreement. And so, as I've said several times and written, if you have a conflict between God and the devil, the Western liberal will split the difference. They will never defeat evil because there's no such thing as evil. It's simply a matter of your opinion. You tell us that Iran is the aggressor. Well, it is aggressive. On the other hand, no, there's no other hand when you're facing a genocidal lunatic regime. I'm not surprised that Israel felt the need to attack Iran at all. This wasn't the 11th hour. This wasn't even the 59th minute. This was midnight. The Israelis have had very credible intelligence that two things were happening which caused an existential crisis that Israel had to deal with immediately. The first was that Iran was now at the point of working out how to fit nuclear material onto its missiles. And secondly, it had ramped up its ballistic missile production to produce 300 missiles per month. Each missile could take apparently 1 ton of explosive. And as a result, this was considered to be an immediate existential threat, which Israel had no choice but to confront. I'm not privy to, obviously, to the discussions that Prime Minister Netanyahu had with President Trump. I have no idea what assurances Trump gave Netanyahu, but I do know that Netanyahu felt he had to go to war regardless. And it was a tremendous act of courage, political courage, because at that stage, all we knew was that Iran had thousands of extremely powerful missiles, much more powerful than missiles which have been constantly raining down on Israel over many years from the Hamas, from the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and most recently from the Houthis in Yemen. These missiles were much more powerful, much more lethal, could do much more harm. The first we knew that Israel had attacked Iran, which it did, seems a long time ago now, but I think it was only in the early hours of last Friday morning. The first we knew was at 3:00 in the morning. This was tremendously ferocious shriek emanated from our phones, all of our phones across the country. And we all leapt into the shelters. And at that point, we knew this wasn't the Houthis. This was Iran. And at that point, Israel alerted the entire country, because at that point, they thought that it was quite possible that Iran would immediately unleash salvos of thousands of missiles. In fact, that didn't happen. What we now know, what we came to know in the next few hours, and this was a surprise to all of us, was the stunning, unprecedented success of those initial attacks by the Israel Air Force, which took out, I think, the entire Iranian military security leadership and a number of nuclear weapons engineers, nuclear program engineers. And consequently, the regime, one surmises, was thrown into such chaos and confusion that it was several hours before they got their act together and started reprisals. So that was a surprise. The sheer audacity, brilliance, and extraordinary coordination and planning, and the fantastic intelligence work that had been 20 years in the making, in which Mossad agents had been embedded in Iran. I can imagine how dangerous that was all those years, and had set up amazing things like drone factories, which were existing without being detected and which sprang into action as soon as the attack started. So this was a surprise, the extent of the brilliance and the ingenuity and the daringness of it. But the fact that Israel attacked, no, that wasn't a surprise at all. What people don't want to understand is that what they think of as a war between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza, and what they looked on with some perplexity at another war by an amazing coincidence that Israel had with people called Hezbollah in Lebanon. They don't understand that what was launched on October 7, 2023, was the opening salvo in a final onslaught by Iran to exterminate Israel, in which Iran was largely working through its proxies in what was a 7-front war. It consisted of, apart from Iran, it consisted of Gaza, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and what's called the West Bank, all of which basically erupted in various ways at the same time. And this was part of Iran's strategy to surround Israel with what they called a ring of fire, in which Israel would be kind of suffocated, strangled, whatever you like to use as a metaphor, but basically destroyed by the pressures of terrorism, of missiles, and of pressure to leave the country by wearing everybody down through demoralization. And that's what was supposed to have happened on October 7, that in fact it didn't go off as was expected, because on that day it had been expected, one is led to believe, that Hezbollah would have joined in, and it didn't. And it became what became the attempt by Israel to root out and destroy Hamas forever as a military force in Gaza. So these fronts all are obviously they're different. They have different demographics, different compositions. They present different challenges. In Gaza, as you may know, Israel, far from occupying Gaza, Israel left Gaza completely in 2005, and as a result had no what's called human intelligence on the ground. There was no presence in order that it could see anything. And not only did it have no kind of civilians living there as its eyes and ears, but it made a strategic error. It thought that, the Palestinian issue in Gaza was so intractable it couldn't solve it. The best it could hope for, what was called mowing the lawn, which was every so often it would have an outbreak of violence and missiles and terrorism, which it couldn't cope with. It would go into Gaza, it would deal with that, it would set back the Hamas for a few years, and then it would all start up again. And that was the most that they could hope for. And as a result, they kind of left Gaza alone. They didn't put spies in there. They didn't think that they were ever going to have to deal with it. They parked it. It was a terrible conceptual error. But that's what they did. Whereas with Iran, Israel has known for decades that Iran, very different kettle of fish. First of all, it's the head of the snake. It's the head of the Shia axis in the Middle East, that it was behind the Hamas. It was behind the Hezbollah. It's the ally of Qatar. It had militias in Iraq. It had militias in Syria. It was a multi-headed hydra, to mix my metaphor. It was a multi-pronged aim. It was first of all to exterminate Israel and murder every Jew it could find, because it is literally genocidal. And that would be a precursor to taking on, having got rid of what they call the little Satan, which is Israel. They would then attack the big Satan, which was America. And they don't think Britain is far behind. They think Britain also has a special place in Shia Islamic hell for various reasons. So Israel was under absolutely no illusions that it had this genocidal aim, and it was infinitely more powerful because it's so enormous, because it's very strategic. It's run by very smart people. Even though they're religious fanatics, they are strategically smart. And Israel knew that it was up against this and it had to be dealt with. And unfortunately, the West chose to either ignore or dismiss it or minimize it. And even when they tried to address the problem of Iran being in breach, as they suspected, of the nuclear proliferation treaty, where they suspected that it was building a bomb, the West chose to deal with this by negotiation and compromise. And that went on for years and years and years. And during this time, including the 20 months of the war until very recently, until President Trump came into office, Israel was facing a situation in which its most powerful backer, America, did not want it to go to war against Iran. When October 7 happened, one reads that Prime Minister Netanyahu, understanding that Iran was ultimately behind this, and what Iran wanted to do was to carry on with such attacks until Israel was annihilated, he wanted to strike Iran. And by all accounts, President Biden forbade him to do so. Now, it's one thing if America doesn't join Israel in its attack, but it's quite another if America is going to withhold support, so withhold arms and withhold the support that it would be needed to come to Israel's defense if Iran unleashed. So Netanyahu was absolutely stymied. He couldn't move. And even when President Trump came to office, it's not clear to me what was going on because I'm not privy to the discussions, but it looked to me as if President Trump, he said he wanted to be the president that ends wars, not starts them or doesn't engage with them. And he wanted to give peace a chance, to quote John Lennon. He wanted Iran to negotiate. He wanted to negotiate a deal with Iran. And I have to say, my heart, and many hearts here, sank when we heard this, because we've been here before. There is no negotiation you can have with religious fanatics like the rulers of the Iranian regime, who believe that by bringing about the apocalypse on earth, they will bring to earth the Shia Messiah. There is no negotiation with that, and with people who believe that it is their God-given duty to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. There is no negotiation with that. They are past masters at lying, dissimulation, manipulation. And we thought, here we go again. And, even now, President Trump is talking about, I want to get them back to the negotiating table. But we can all see that, America is very much helping to defend Israel. And as we speak, and this may change even by the time you broadcast this, there's a feeling here in Israel that President Trump is gearing up to have a much more aggressive play a much more aggressive part in this war, but we still don't know. So that's why Netanyahu had to wait until it was literally, there was no alternative. He had to do it. Until then, he was prevented from doing so. The British and the Americans and the French have come down on Israel over the years like a ton of bricks and blamed Israel for standing in the way of peace. So this is how they see Israel. They see Israel as the problem. They see Israel's existence as the problem. They see Israel's behavior as the problem. And they also see Israel as the kind of driver of events in the region. Yeah. The idea that Iran actually has driven the events which have led to this war is not even acknowledged. It's Israel that's driven the events, because as soon as Israel acts in its own self-defense, that is considered an act of aggression. This is the mindset of really the whole of the West, by which I mean this, that sure, there are millions of people in the West, many of whom may be watching your broadcast now, who are perfectly sane and decent and moral and understand the difference between truth and lies, who get it, who understand what the truth of it is. But the general view, which is encompassed by the entire political and cultural elite of the West, has had its brain completely fried by decades of indoctrination in this surreal Orwellian way of thinking, in which it's now impossible to present facts and evidence to them and say, but look, here are facts, here is evidence, so what you're saying is wrong. No. They can't deal with that. You're dealing with, I'm afraid to say, an entirely closed thought system. And that's very, very terrifying.